It's not that deep. Everything love, lust, and life.
Sex. We talk about it so you can get better at it. We can all get better at it and maybe feel a bit happier in the process. It's not that deep. Or is it?
Hi, and welcome to the latest Sex It's Not That Deep. I'm Andy. I'm here today with my wife Fran, and we're delighted to introduce Julianne Vaccaro. Julianne is a somatic erotic blueprint coach, spiritual mentor, and women's health and life coach. She's 78,000 Instagram followers. Popular podcast, the Reclamation Project podcast. So, welcome, Julianne. Thanks for joining us. Would you mind telling our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the intro. I'm excited to be here. I always love how we get connected and the different places in the world that we get to share this work and message. Um, I have been in the coaching industry and space for about 12 years, and I started out in the holistic health coaching space when I was about 19. And at that point in my life, I was so driven by my need for perfection and image and getting it right. And I had this belief that if I could just have the image and change my body enough to be perfect for whatever that meant for me at that time, that everything would fall into place and I would be happy and free and the love would come and the money would come and the approval would come. And so I was on a mission to fix my body. And I did that through the practice of holistic health, which was actually really great in a sense, right? But what I was doing was actually ignoring the wisdom of my own body because of what everybody was telling me what health meant. And so I did every different kind of diet box in the world, like raw veganism, paleo, gluten-free, like everything you can think of I tried. Macrobiotics. And I landed on the raw veganism for about 3 years and I loved it until my body just started like crapping out on me. My hair was falling out, like everything was going wrong. And I was only about 21 at the time. And I would black out every time I stood up. I would sleep so long and I would never feel energized. And I started seeing an Oriental medicine doctor and realized that I had adrenal fatigue and adrenal exhaustion. And it was the first time that I had ever actually experienced something like that in my body, where I was like, I'm 21 and I'm gaining weight like no other. My hair's falling out. Like, what's wrong? I juice every single day. I eat organic foods. I'm taking all of the fucking supplements. Like, this shouldn't be happening. So I realized that all of these other parts of me, like the self, was not being addressed. My emotional health wasn't being looked at. My relationships weren't being looked at. I had moved to a new part of the States where I didn't have family or community. And so I felt really alone. And that started showing up in my body. And so I realized also that you have to eat for your specific body type. Even though raw veganism might be really great for some people and it's healthy, it wasn't healthy or right for me. So I started to look at the bigger picture and I started to look at my emotions and my relationship. And eventually that led me into the fitness space. And I was a bodybuilder for about 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years. And I competed in fitness shows and bikini competitions. And I was doing a lot of my holistic practice at that time. But as I went into the fitness space, that need for perfection and those drivers of like something's wrong and I need to be fixed started reappearing. And so I did the same thing with fitness and movement and destroyed my body again. And I had adrenal exhaustion. I lost my period for a year. All of my eating disorders that I had healed came back. Like, I was struggling with substance abuse because I was still chasing this image. And so I was willing to do whatever it took until it was about my last show. And there was a really awful binge. And I just looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, who are you doing this for? You know, like, you're not going to do this for the rest of your life. You know, you're meant for more. So if you don't turn it around now, it's just going to get harder.
That was quite an
And
awakening moment then.
Yeah, it was it was a very awakening moment while I was in my mom's car with Oreos and peanut butter all over the seat and the steering wheel because I had like binged on the way home from Target during Halloween time, and I was like throwing Oreos out the window, and then got home and I was like, "Oh my God, I just blacked out. What am I doing?" And so that was another big turning point for me where I decided to actually look at myself and look at my relationship to body and food from a new perspective. So I started to heal from the inside out, healed my hormones, healed all of these pieces, and it was like all of the mountains that were so in front of my face for so long were moved, and then I could see all of the rest of the landscape, and I could see like, oh, I'm in one abusive relationship after the next. Oh, that kind of replicates the relationship that I have to my body. And so I started looking at these deeper pieces and started studying and went to school for spiritual psychology. And then, long story short, ended an abusive relationship that ended in a non consensual pregnancy, and my whole world stopped. And that was another massive turning point for me where I was like, this now needs the attention. And that experience cracked me open in a way that I hadn't known before. And it had me look at my sexuality, something that I had never valued or thought to look at, because why would that help me in getting me to where I wanted to go? Why would that give me freedom? Something that I had been taught to shame and repress and hide and feel wrong about, you know? And so I started working with somatic sexologists, and everything in my world started to transform. And my business went from like 5K months to multiple six figures in a couple years. I went from 0 to six figures in like 6 to 7 months, I believe, that year. And everything started to change. And I was like, oh, like this is the juice in the work that I was doing in the world, because I was working with a lot of ex-athletes and competitors and coming home to their body. And then this sexuality piece was like, oh, this was a missing element that I didn't even know was missing until I felt it myself. So from that point forward, I really dedicated my work to somatics and sexuality and supporting women in finding freedom in their bodies, and freedom in their femininity, and the courage to live a heart-led life and go after the more, but from a place of purpose and pleasure and play.
Do you think that the sexual story that you grew up with was a broken story?
Definitely. Definitely. The experience that I shared that led me to look at my sexuality was such an enlightening moment, because it had me look at my sexual programming. Like what did I learn about sex? What did I learn about genitals? What did I learn about touch? What did I learn about intimacy? And a lot of my upbringing was in the Catholic Church. Like I found a picture of me the other day at my communion with like, all of the things, and I'm like, that was a lot of my uncovering and my unearthing and my unraveling and my remembering, was actually like having to look at my religious programming on top of the sex education, or the lack of sex education, the lack of conversation about boundaries, autonomy, pleasure, consent, like that we are all missing when we're so young,
Definitely.
and we're starting to get in touch with our sexuality.
This is something that we found a lot.
You mentioned my podcast when we first jumped on, and my intention with starting that from the beginning was like, how do I want a place and a platform to talk about the things that people don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
Because at that time I was in the fitness industry, and it was like, oh, everyone's struggling with eating disorders and PEDs, but it's laughed about and no one talks about it publicly. And then the public thinks that this version of a body is accessible and possible and normal. That's not right. So yeah, I hear that.
And we get that without sexuality, of normalization of things that aren't, denormalization of things that are normal as well. I was just wondering how you sort of changed your opinion, has obviously changed so much. How do you go about doing that with people?
How do I bring people into rewriting their stories and like coming home, right? Like,
yeah,
it's a journey. It's such a journey, and it's such a process. And I think what's unique about the work that I offer is that it's a very holistic view,
yeah,
and we go into all of it. And the reason why I value that and have spent so much in my own personal work in finding mastery in multiple areas like health and sex and somatics is because it's all really interconnected.
Yeah.
And so for a lot of women, when they're struggling with their food issues, it's actually really deeply connected to their sense of self, their self-trust, whether and like what's their relationship to pleasure. Are they disgusted by their body? I mean, eating disorders and body image is so connected to like the psyche, and also there's like a lack of safety that's been experienced in the body, so we just fly up and out, right?
Yeah.
So the approach that I take in supporting women and really coming home to freedom in their bodies is looking at all areas of the self and doing it with lots of gentleness and lots of slowness and lots of tool giving,
Yeah.
and like, hey, these are the things that are going to have to come up, right? Like, you're going to have to let go of things. You might have to lose people, right? Or things might shift in your external world because of how much you're shifting and growing.
Yeah.
So really looking at like, do they have the tools to hold themselves in these tender places? Because that's often the thing that we don't feel it, and we push it down in our bodies, or we try to escape it, but in fact it's living here. So much of this work is looking and feeling in the body and being like, there's a lot here you haven't felt for X amount of time. Let's be with what's living in the body and go from there.
What's the biggest problems you're seeing though in sex and relationships now?
What are the biggest areas? What I see in relationship is often, and I mainly work with heterosexual couples as well, so prefacing that, what I often see, and there's a thread of similarity in the women that I attract and the women that I work with. So naturally, there's a similar flavor as to the concerns that arise in partnership. So what I see in women is feeling like they start to self-abandon. They self-abandon their practices, or they abandon their truths or their heart or the expression of who they are in their fullness because of fear, right? Like, what if this person can't hold my emotions, or I'm scared to show my anger because it's been judged, or because I've hurt myself in the past, right? So like, um what I start to see is that relationship becomes such a beautiful place, and it can also be challenging to really be able to stand in the truth of who you are, and like stand in that erectness with softness as the feminine pole. And then from a place of women coming in and doing this work with me more in one-on-one, um, what I would say is the word courage comes up. um, I think that this work is really courageous in the way that it asks us to surrender into our heart and the truth of what's arising there. And that's that it takes so much courage to be able to stand in front of whatever and whoever before you, and to say like, this is my heart. And um so I feel that the work, regardless of what level you're at, whether you're just starting to get into sexuality or you're a seasoned practitioner, like the work is always finding and landing in congruency within yourself. And to me, that means owning your truth, and not like this is my truth, I'm going to scream it from the rooftops, but like, this is what's happening in my heart. I feel XYZ, and being able to share that and convey that in a way that invites others into their heart and into their knowing, instead of a demand or
Yeah.
like a leak, an energy.
Communication, inviting it, but from a
Yeah.
position of strength. That's a really beautiful
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Yeah.
So when you're
Absolutely.
working with people on their issues with the relationship and their sex life, just with one of the partners, or do you work with both?
I mainly do work with women, and I'm usually working with one. And the reason why I do that is because most of my work has been with women, but also because from where I stand, so much of this is also a reflection of you
Mm.
and your relationship to self. So while there's things that need and can be addressed in the partnership, I think that it's even more important for us to do the work on ourselves before,
Yeah.
during, after, always, because that regulation with our nervous system, and we're on that journey, the stuff that comes up in relationship, I feel is like the gift. It's the gem, because that's what's needed to look at and be with, and then we get to heal more in that relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree totally. I think so many issues, whether it's relationships, their sex life, their career, anything at all, if you're not focusing on yourself and getting that right, you can't be the best. I think it's often overlooked to focus on yourself rather than the bigger picture.
Yeah, and when talking about common themes or threads, like something that I see a lot when women get into partnership is outsourcing their pleasure. So they might have like developed this really beautiful pleasure practice and cultivated this relationship with their body and sensuality, and then they get into partnership and they stop pleasuring, or they stop dancing, or they stop like bringing their desire and bringing this sensual side of themselves to the table. And that's, a form of self-abandoning. And then I see that impact the relationship, and then there will be like finger pointing of like, he doesn't do this or he does this. And so I'm kind of looking at, yes, all of that, and how are you loving and pleasuring yourself. And then the other component was the erotic blueprint, which is another really big thing that I think everyone will love here. So the erotic blueprints is a incredible framework and system for sexuality. If you're familiar with the love languages, it's an easy thing to be like, oh, okay, there's 5 languages. It's similar to that, but for the realm of eroticism, and it's a lot more in depth. So there's 5 erotic blueprints. There's sexual, sensual, energetic, kinky, and a shapeshifter, to keep it quite simple. And so what happens in relationships, just like what would happen in love languages, is like I might have a partner that shows me their love through words of affirmation, and then I might be touched, and we're kind of like just not feeling love, not feeling met, and that happens with sex. And so the system of the erotic blueprints is really powerful, because what couples usually come to me for is feeling like their blueprints are mismatched. They might not have that language yet, but that's what's arising. Is one of them might be really energetic, and that means like loving space, loving anticipation, really light fingertip touch to start. Like safety is really important for an energetic. Whereas a sexual is like the opposite. The sexual can go from 0 to 100 like that. Like sex is
me.
like fucking water, right? Like they're just like objectify me. Like they love it, right? Whereas an energetic is different. And so what I see a lot in partnerships is usually you end up with a partner who is ironically like the opposite blueprint. The universe works in opposites, and so it's almost this, again, this practice, this opportunity to come into your own wholeness. And usually that shows up by playing with the opposite in this 3D world, to remember that that is also who we are.
Yeah, you describing it, and I'm thinking how many millions of relationships recognizing that mismatch and doing anything about it and failing as a result. It's potentially huge, isn't it?
Totally.
How much pleasure are we missing out on, not being able to talk about it correctly?
Well, and like you said so beautifully before when you mentioned communication, like you often don't even realize it's missing.
Yeah.
And it can be really simple. Like
Yeah.
it can be a really simple step-by-step process. And that's where I almost go back to the courage. Because although it's simple and although it's kind of like an easy map, it's courageous to say, actually, this is who I am and this is what I need. And to not feel shame about it, which like goes back to what we started with, which is the lack of sex education and awareness. So like, people who are sexuals most likely really resonate with the culturized representation of what sex is, right? Like the sexual blueprint loves ejaculation and like genitals and wet pussies and hard cocks and like what we kind of think of when we look at the porn industry. And that's beautiful. And when you look at all of the blueprints, though, the rest are heavily underrepresented in porn, right? So, like, I think a lot of us don't even know the capacity for pleasure. What is erotically possible? Like, what do you mean you can have an orgasm without touch?
Yeah.
What do you mean, like, I can feel like I'm having an orgasm in my ear without a Q-tip, like, you know what I mean? Like full body orgasms, you can feel that all over. Um, so yeah, the like what is actually possible, and how can we get these things into people's hands? Because that connection is often missed.
So you mentioned porn. A lot of these things are underrepresented in it. Do you think overall porn's had the centre of some of the issues you work with people regularly? Sort of the way that people in their adolescence learn about it is from porn and end up with the wrong approach and the wrong idea to things come through as a problem often in your work.
I do. I do. I see it from a couple of different angles. I see it from the place with men where they can feel somewhat like trapped or stuck in the path to ejaculation and release that they've created, where they only ever get off that one way. Or now it's become like such a developed pattern or pathway to pleasure that that's like, yes, the only way they can get off, or they need to up the ante. And so I think that with porn, it's intensified, it's dramatized, and there's a place for all of that. But I think because it's so unbalanced, we're looking at it from like a
This
this
is one angle,
is sex. Yeah, like this is sex.
but
Um,
this could be the whole, the whole. Oh, I suppose it covers everything rather than just
totally.
this one little area.
Yeah. So I think with cock-bodied humans, and I say that because that's usually where I feel it shows up the most. And to maybe even be like, I think with sexual blueprints, also sometimes it's really common because they tend to be more visual. They really like porn. Like, I'm an energetic. My partner the other day was like, because I was like, I'm gonna self pleasure. Then I went downstairs, like, I already had 3 orgasms. She's like, you did? What, did you watch anything? Did you listen? I was like, no. Like, I just never watch or listen. I don't know. Then that's, I think, my cultivated relationship to my energetic, whereas some other people are really visual, and those are beautiful expressions. They're not, one's not better than the other. Um, I think that porn can tend to desensitize cock-bodied humans in the bedroom, where because everything is really heightened in porn, they're touching and replicating that way to cause the same effect in their partner that they see in porn, instead of actually slowing down to be attuned to what's actually alive and here right now. Is really intense touch what's needed, or is it a breath? Is it a little bit of tenderness, or is it a flogger? Like, who knows? But that's the beauty of cultivating relationship to sensation in the body, and attunement is being able to really feel your partner and then co-create the energy that's desired and needed. But I think with vulva-bodied people, when it comes to porn, I think that what I see it mainly doing is creating an expectation of performance, and the need, or the thought that in order to be lovable or fuckable or desirable, they have to perform that way. The way that we're mutilating or reorganizing our genitals so that they can look a certain way, because the porn industry has only shown vulvas that are small and inner labias are small, right? So like, there's so many elements that are important to
And
bring to the
pale,
table.
that's the one I found was color different.
Yeah.
You get older,
Yeah.
especially. I
Mm-hmm.
always thought that you have color, and that because I'm not that color, is that wrong?
Yeah.
It's not a positive thing, is it really?
I think your use of the word perform was really powerful, and because it can be fun to perform and to a character at times and an alter ego, but if you need to perform for your partner, then yeah, that's not a positive. If that
Yeah.
feels like an obligation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that you brought that in, because there is a place in for role play and characters, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things, most beautiful and transformative things about sexuality, and using that as the vehicle to enlightenment or wholeness, is like, you get to play out all of these parts of yourself. So, okay, you want to be the whore, or do you want to be the like sexualizing um male that just like dominates, and it's like all of those expressions and parts of you, because we hold all of it, the full spectrum of archetypes in ourselves, every single one of us, even gender bending, like we can play into all of those places. So, and that's part of the evolution, is we get to actually like expand ourselves. But I think the key in it is being able to really locate where you are in it and what's the come from. Like when you're going to perform and play, is it because you want to get to know this energy and you want to like play and see what it feels like, and can you run sexual energy through your system with this other persona, um or is it from a place of wanting to create pleasure in this other human because of what it means to you, like things like that.
And you can't do that successfully if you're lost yourself as well. You have to do the work on yourself. Everything that you've said is sort of key, isn't it?
Sexual self-awareness, and how can we improve that?
I like it. Sexual self-awareness and how you can improve it. I like that question. What does sexual awareness mean to both of you? I'm very curious if you're open to sharing.
Um, I mean, I'm taking my perspective. It's really understanding where I'm and being aware. I certainly am that sexuality has changed over, um, since I was sort of entered into that world as a teenager and through to now, enjoying what I like to do and what I perceive about sex. And I'm really aware of how experiences and meeting new people, and it does have a big difference on me. And I suppose for me, that's probably where I would see it, is that it's about being aware and sort of dealing with that. How about you?
For me, I've been sort of looking at the energies a bit more, about where I'm coming from for things, what we're bringing to something when we start something together, especially. Just think that's really changed for us since we've started learning. That you've got that defined role of what a relationship is, what women are, what sex is, sort of thing, and then we've been exploring so many different aspects of things that we've realised that it's not who I am, sort of thing, haven't we? Be quite so heavily sexual in the way that I approach sex, because I'm being very goal oriented, and so learning to take care in the other aspects as well has been something that we've sort of been developing an awareness of.
Yeah, that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing those with me. Um, yeah, what I heard in both of those was being able to stay in touch with who you are as an erotic being as you evolve and grow, and also as like all of that in the space of relationship too. Like you mentioned long distance, not long distance, long-term relationship, or maybe even long distance, right? Um, I think for me, and then I can go into my thoughts on what you can do to expand. I think the awareness piece for me, it all feels kind of swirled in a similar with a similar thread of can I be present and true with what's arising in the moment. And that might not sound sexual, but it feels like it's a learning and a lesson to bring everywhere for me and for any of us who have bodies. Like, can we be courageous enough to feel what's happening right now in our body in this moment, and to move with that, and to use that. And I feel that that ties into my sexual awareness and my sexual self and wholeness, because if I can do that in the bedroom, I can do that anywhere. And something that I always say is the way that you show up in the bedroom is the way you show up everywhere. And so if I'm hitting an edge in the bedroom, I know it's going to show up somewhere else in my life. So if I can get right to the most juiciest charged place to alchemize and transmute this, like that experience I can take with me everywhere. If I'm having a hard time opening in sex, I get to go inside of myself and find the places that are closed and be courageous enough to feel that, and then that creates the deeper intimacy and connection. So in terms of like tips for building that, simply said, like, go on an erotic journey with your own body and your own hands and your own toys. There's so much that you can play with. And then pairing that with the erotic blueprints, I think is a really stellar framework, because with the blueprints, it's a really easy way for you to say, oh, this is where I'm at. This is my current blueprint, or the blueprint to my pleasure right now. This is what's available, and then this is where I want to go. And this is where I might be mismatched or having miscommunication with a lover. And what do they want to expand into? What do I want to expand to? Do they want to play in kink? Or yeah, they want to play in kink, but they have like boundaries in this kink. So being able to like really play and experiment and explore your own system, to know what your pathways are and what your blueprint is, um, and then to be able to meet the edges that you find within that like probably hold shame because of society telling you that you should or shouldn't feel pleasure there. That's the beauty of it, and I think that creates the wholeness and the awareness more than anything, and the power to then share it.
Different way of putting it than we could ever have put it. But that's what we have been doing, isn't it? We have been sort of trying new things that are outside of our standard sort of mode of operation, and coming back and going, what did we think of?
Just since starting this podcast, we've learned a lot about ourselves, haven't we?
Yeah.
And learned a lot of new things, and yeah, the brain has probably been the organ in all of that, hasn't it? In things that we've done differently.
Yeah. And it's exciting.
Exactly.
So something I'm curious about, Julianne, is had much experience working with people who are maybe in open relationships?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do have experience in those realms. I wouldn't say it's my area of expertise in the sense of like a couple coming to me and saying, hey, I want to be poly. Can you support us in that transition? However, I've spent a lot of time and work unraveling those belief systems or only one way of being in relationship with dozens and hundreds of women, because what I see is that once you start to go into the realm of sexuality, so much starts to open up. Like so much starts to become possible, and I also feel that our hearts start to open in ways that we've never known, and we start to dissolve all of the blocks and the walls that we've placed over our hearts. And what I find that does is reveals more of the true authentic self. And for some of us, many of us, like society has only given us one path of humaning. You grow up, you go to college, you make money, you like get married, you have kids, you have the house, and then you die. It's what you do. So when you start to find your true authentic self, and you start to actually really become in touch with your desires and what the truth of those really are and why, and like what you want to experience, I feel that the way that we lifestyle shifts tremendously. And for some of us, that means actually loving all genders and maybe becoming genderless and not being any more attracted to a genital type or the presentation of a gender, and instead finding themselves loving a human for the truth of who they are, regardless of what their body looks like. And I think with this work, one of the beautiful things is like pleasures for everybody, and regardless of shape, size, color, orientation, expression, lifestyle, like your body is made for pleasure. And when that is how you're living and moving and the way you're embodying your eroticism, it changes so much. And I think that there's so much permission and freedom to love who it is that you want. So that's my joy and get off in it, is like, I want to get to the truth of you and your desires. You want to go fuck 12 people? Awesome. Let's do it. Is that the truth of you? Let's do it in a safe way, or you want to be monogamous and you want to be deeply and loving in union with one person? Awesome. Let's get that to like the truth, the core desire there, and let's go experience that.
Really powerful. Yeah, there's something kind of we've been talking about actually, I suppose, is we should stop living in our boxes. You know, you're given these boxes to live in, then there's no reason for it. No.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a good box to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love the thought that, yeah, being who you are is the number one thing in life. I think that's a powerful thing to go through life with.
To add one piece to that too, I think a lot of the another thread in the work that I do is, regardless of what gender you are, whether I've worked with men or women, it's always about uniting their sex with their heart. And that meaning like marrying their spirituality with their sexuality. And so, like, you talked about Broken Story and I talked about religion, like that experience, and for so many of us that have grown up with religion, have just split the sexual side of themselves off from the totality of who they are.
Yeah.
So for me, the way that showed up was like, okay, every single time then I used to have sex, it felt like a piece of me was being taken, or my heart wasn't in it. And that prevented me from feeling the fullness of pleasure, the fullness of freedom, of ecstasy, of orgasmic aliveness in my system, because how could this ever be good? How could this ever be like the connection to God or goddess or spirit? So after marrying that, that changed the experience immensely. And I think that, yeah, I forgot where I was going with that, but that feels like an important piece.
A lot of shame often as well with sexuality, but I don't think there needs to be. I think being yourself and being sexual is part of who we should be, you know, in the eyes of God, I suppose. You know, that you should be all that you could be. What this work is, isn't it? It's being all that you can be, and surely that's a good thing, you know. I think there's too much shame around sex.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you've got some cool new stuff coming up in February, I think you were saying.
I do.
Tell us about
Yeah,
it.
thank you. I have a new offering coming up that's called Animal Body Practice, and I'm so fucking excited for it because I've been teaching the work of somatics and sexuality, for the last like 5, 6 years. And last year I started my own mystery school to teach people how to be practitioners of this work. And so I've been working with it for a while, but this is the first time that I'm putting it out in this way, where it's accessible in this kind of a journey. So it is an 8-week journey to really journey into your wild, sacred, primal feminine, which is a lot of what we talked about today, which is alchemizing your emotions, like accessing your wildness, your primal energy, like going into the places of fear and shadow and guilt and sorrow and despair, and like the heavy, dense stuff that most of us don't want to feel or don't, know how to feel. I think that if we did know how to feel it, we would want to feel it because it's life giving on a level, and we are we are on the other side of that. We get to meet more of who we are when we move through that. So inside of animal body practice, I'm going to be walking women through their own animal body and giving them the tools to be able to, like, honestly move better in the world with their body, find freedom in their body. And a lot of times we think the path is one way, and it's really actually going into the darkness and going into the shadow and finding the pleasure, and creating the pathways in your body to know how to do that. Like, once you know how to go into those places and transmute it and find pleasure, it's easier and you get really good at it. So animal practice is me giving you the tools of how to actually do this work in your body, and we get to play in it together. You get to experience it so that you ultimately become your own best guide, healer, and priestess. That's my goal for the people that I work with, is giving them the tools to their own body.
Amazing. Giving you your power, I suppose. Your power back.
Totally. Mm-hmm.
That's an amazing thing. That sounds like really exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited. So yeah, we start in about mid-February, and it's going to be an 8-week journey. So I would love to have anybody and all of you here.
Cool. So where do people can they contact you?
Instagram would be the best place. So at Julianne Vaccaro, and my website is juliannevaccaro.com if you'd like to check more of me out and my story and background.
Awesome.
Awesome. Well, Julianne, thank you so much for your time today. I think that's been really interesting, and that a male's perspective.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It's really exciting work that you do as well. So thank you so
Mm.
much. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you both. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your amazing questions.
Okay. So thank you for listening, everyone. As usual, drop us a like, follow, and a review wherever you can, and we'll be back next time for our next episode.
Sex. It's not that deep.